Peace and blessings, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of Spotlight this evening. I'm Edjuenka, and I have a very special guest, Attorney Ray Harris. He's a Law Reform Commissioner and author of the book, The Word, That Which Is Written and Should Be Known. He's given us, I think, 10 years or more of his service here to the BVI, and he's returning to his homeland in Dominica. And we are going to be talking this evening about his sojourn here, his tenure here, the legislation that he's reformed and developed, as well as some of his spiritual concepts. Many of you may not know. He's rooted and grounded in very sound spiritual concepts. We're going to explore some of them, and we are going to also try to solicit and elicit from him some observations of the Virgin Islands and to get his view and advice on our way forward, the BVI, going forward from here. So you stay tuned. We're going to take a break for a word from our sponsors, and when we come back, we're going to get right into Attorney Harris, the Law Reform Commissioner, some of the legislation, the importance of that legislation, and where we go from here regarding the enactment of the legislation that he's developed. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
This program is sponsored by the law firm of J.S. Archibald & Co. and by the trust company J.S. Archibald Trust Services Limited, both of Roadtown, Tortola, BVI.
Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm Edjuenka, and I'd like to go straight to my guest, Attorney Ray Harris, Law Reform Commissioner. Brother Ray, good to see you, as usual.
Thanks as usual, my brother Edjuenka. Yeah. And I would like to say love, peace, and lights to all those who are listening to us this evening.
Yes. Lots of love and lots of lights. You've been here, 10 years now?
I've been here from 2002. April, mid-April. I arrived here mid-April, and that's when the Law Reform Commission began. We had an inaugural ceremony, I think, May 1st. Okay? And from there, we moved forward to try to see what's the best way to develop the Law Reform Commission.
Okay. And talk us about your terms of reference, to what you came to do and how you set about doing it.
Okay. Well, when I came, I was asked to come up here as chairman of the Law Reform Commission. I was blessed with other commissioners. The other commissioners were Mr. Gerard Ferrara, QC, Alicia Penn Butler, Mr. Douglas Whitley, Mr. Paul Webster, QC. You see, and these were the 4 other commissioners, but they are part-time. I was the only full-time one. So the first thing we thought of, we said we should maybe sit down. Obviously, I read through your law books to see what areas were crying out for reform. And then I also wrote a standard letter to every permanent secretary and every executive head in statutory boards. And I asked them under their portfolio to discuss it with their ministers and submit to the commission at least 3 areas under their portfolio that was crying out for reform. I also did that with my law reform commissioners. I did that with my staff. And then from that I collated the notes and I wrote a strategic plan. I did a SWOT analysis, that's the strengths, weaknesses, opportunity to serve, the threats. And therefore, based on the input I got, we came up with around 30-something subjects of law which are crying out for reform.
Why did the government feel the need to reform the law? What did that need come out of?
Let's face it, when you start having laws on your statute books for 100 years, they are antiquated, they're out of sync with reality of the times. Therefore, it needs total revamping, not just cosmetic changes and amendments. So that is a need that's when law reform is necessary.
So the laws were no longer working, they were no longer appropriate, the time had passed them, the new modern technology, modern social behavior, all those things came into play to change to make the laws that was existing less effective.
That's a reality, and that reality is not only a reality here, it's a reality throughout the Caribbean, throughout the world. More and more people are realizing that law reform is an essential part of the developmental process, you see. And besides writing that strategic plan, what we did, we submitted the 30-something subjects to the Attorney General, who then passed it on to the Executive Council, as it was then called. And then they prioritized 12 of that 30-something subjects as top priority, and they gave it to us in order of priority. And then we started to move forward.
What was that priority?
Well, the priorities were the first 12 subjects we did. The first 12 subjects we did, it started off with evidence. Evidence, at the time, they needed a new evidence law. Incidentally, they eventually passed the evidence law in 2006 as the evidence law you have right now. But then the next thing was education. So we focused on education. And then there was juvenile sentencing and alternative punishment. And there was freedom of information. These were the list. That's the list they gave back to us. Arbitration, mediation, jury legislation, environmental law. These were some of the top priorities that we had initially. And from the outset, when we sat, Mr. Ferrara, Mr. Webster, Alicia Penn Butler, and Mr. Douglas Wheatley, we sat. I was saying to them, in the best possible way to do this would be very likely to tap into the resources that we have, which, in other words, every subject you're doing, although you may be lawyers, you find people on the ground who know much more about that subject than you do from just practical experience. So what we decided to use committees. The Commission has the power under the Law Reform Commission Act to appoint committees. So we decided to always have committees of around 10 people, 10, 12 people to sit with us who are knowledgeable or have specific experience in that subject area or are especially qualified in that area. And we would write these people and ask them if they were prepared to give up of their time, at least from between 9 and 4, at least once a month. So every subject area we always tapped into local people who knew that subject area so that we could benefit from that as well. And we also decided that we would also have a lot of community meetings because we wanted to make the law reform process a participatory process. We wanted to broaden the base of democracy so that people would be part of the legislative process, so that when eventually the laws got to Parliament, to the House of Assembly, after they passed through Cabinet, they would feel a kinship, an identification, knowing that they had had input in that law. You see.
How many other pieces of legislation were enacted?
Well, look at it this way. Evidence.
What were they?
Okay. Evidence has been implemented. The Education Act that you have from 2004, the Commission worked on that. Juvenile sentencing and alternative punishment, that had 9 different laws. Criminal justice alternative punishment is one of those. Youth court.
That was enacted as well?
All those have been enacted.
Okay.
It's all to do with juvenile sentencing alternative punishment. If you look at your 2005 laws, 2005, you'll see all those laws. Some of them are subsidiary laws, some of them are primary laws. Then obviously we did report on freedom of information, but that hasn't been done. We've done a report on arbitration legislation that hasn't been implemented yet, but I understand there is a special select group that's looking at the report and in fact coming up with something shortly. So I'm glad at least that is being utilized. There's a report on mediation, but that hasn't been utilized. There's a report on jury legislation, but I know for a fact that may come forward shortly, because recently I've had some rapport with the Attorney General and the Governor on that, and I know that the government is looking to pass the jury legislation. So thankfully your jury legislation, which is around 100 years old, will soon hopefully be replaced. Report on commercial court rules respecting civil procedure rules. To bring the whole commercial court that people talk about so much, the Commission played its part. The OACS Supreme Court had sent it to us to look at it, and I put together a select committee of people who are very knowledgeable as regards financial services and that commercial law, and we also worked on that. There obviously been a report on environmental legislation that we've talked about, but that's a humongous one. That too, I must say, recently I've been talking to certain government officials.
That's getting a lot of attention.
And there may be some hope there as well. Report on general education regulations, that's completed as well, but I know I had a meeting with the Minister of Education, a very long meeting around a month ago, with his permanent secretary. We spent almost 2.5 hours. So we went through the general education regulations, early childhood education regulations, and there's also technological and vocational education regulations, and there's a small amendment to the Education Act which will be necessary, which we also drafted. It's in the report. Okay. Then we also did a report on commercial court rules to embellish the rules. A lot of that was worked on by Justice Bannister, but then it was passed to the Law Reform Commission. We put together the same committee, and we scrutinized it, refined it, passed it back to Justice Bannister to make sure, because at the end of the day, he's implementing it. So we also, and that's implemented as well. So both those commercial court rules have been enacted. There's a report on existing laws adaptation and modification bill, which is very important, because since you've had your 2007 constitution, we always look at it as a new constitution. We see how time flies. We're 2012. That's 5 years ago. Looks like yesterday. But since that new constitution, in your section 115, it indicates quite clearly that the courts should read the present law with whatever adaptation or modification that may be necessary to bring it in sync with the constitutional provisions. Because remember, now you have your fundamental rights and freedoms chapter, which you didn't have before, and that's entrenched. So it gives the court that leeway. It also says that the legislature should also obviously enact laws to try to ensure that it's in sync with the Constitution. What the problem is there is that, remember, you have separation of powers. You have your executive, you have your judiciary, legislature. But from the time you start saying to a court that you can read a law with whatever adaptation and modification that may be necessary to bring it in sync with the Constitution, it means that you have a judiciary almost playing the part of a legislature, because they're changing words in a law. Becomes a very hairy line.
So the legislature is supposed to be the body that's making the laws.
By all means.
And the judiciary implements
and decides what meaning of the law is.
And interprets
the law. So therefore, this existing laws adaptation and modification bill is an important one, because we had a look. There were certain constitutional cases that have come up in your country, and therefore we had a look at it. As well as, remember, there was a lot of discrepancy at one time between who should do what between the Attorney General and the DPP, because you must remember before the AG used to be dealing with prosecution, and that was separated, and now that's well entrenched in your new constitution. So there were a lot of little uncertainty here and there in relation to that. We cleaned that up as well. And we also dealt with ensuring legislatively that we amended certain laws that are, to our mind, because we had a committee as well, is in fact out of sync with certain fundamental rights and freedoms provisions. And therefore we have endeavored to amend those in the existing laws adaptation modification bill. So if that is passed, it will take it out of the hands of the court, which is what should really happen. The court should remain focused on interpreting the law and telling us what the law means. And that's what they should do.
Okay. So you had about 6 pieces enacted, and you had, I think it's about 16 pieces of legislation.
Well, there's 16 reports. 16 reports.
Okay. And you had...
And some of these reports have more than one law, like a thing like environmental law. You have a huge environmental management and conservation of biodiversity law. But because of that huge law, you're also going to have other little amendments to fisheries law, ports authorities law, national parks, because it'll be subsuming national parks into the environmental management trust that could be set up under that new law. So you also have other laws within one report. Sometimes you submit a report, but just like how I told you, the report on juvenile sentencing alternative punishment had 9 laws.
Had 9 laws. Yeah. And well, let's talk a little bit about that, because those are important aspects of our development, particularly as we notice the spiraling crime and juveniles' participation in that criminal activity. What are some of the laws in that report that we need to be really taking a look at and doing something about?
Well, let me look at criminal justice alternative sentencing, which is on your statute book. Right now, they talk about attendance centers. It's not being implemented. Let me say why I think it ought to be. Many times you find young people, and that's why when we did the criminal justice alternative sentencing law, we thought of this. You found a lot of people under 21 finding themselves in jail for their first offense, which attracts a prison term if convicted. We were of the view that you could have a simple attendance center where anyone with a first conviction, and let's say it's not a gun crime or some violent crime, and you get a proper report from the social development department, that young woman or young man could be told to attend an attendance center, say in East End. That could be merely a community center. It could merely mean that Ray Harris or Edjuenka or some even retired nurse or person, the important thing is that their leisure time, they must report at a certain time, and they may be taught knitting, they may be taught computer science, they could be merely dealing with calisthenics, they could be dealing with something that teaches them something under supervision. That's all. And as long as they check in and they go through the process, there's no conviction on their name, they have learned something new, they have utilized their leisure time without getting themselves in trouble. Because many young people, they get themselves in trouble because of their leisure time.
And what we're doing now by not implementing that is we're criminalizing our young people.
And the reason I mention this is because I do not think, because you see sometimes you have to be realistic. I do not think that an attendance center is going to be too costly to implement. You see the point? The only thing I would say right now is, and I've suggested a small amendment to it, when we drafted the law as a commission, and the committee had made that recommendation, we defined child to be someone under 18, which is in sync with international law. And we defined young person as a person between 18 and under 21. And school and an attendance center would apply to anyone under 21, because we realize that's who we want to catch. You understand?
Yes, but with an attendance center, we would want to develop a more structured approach to the center, wouldn't we? To have a greater impact, to be more effective. Say, for example, we might want to have a place where you can go and learn a trade. You can go and get perhaps some discipline, learn some social skills, conflict resolution skills,
everything you mentioned,
interpersonal skills, and have a real place to go. Even a place where you could stay for a period to perhaps keep you in an environment that will help to shape a change or break a habit or to give you a different direction.
Bear with me. Everything you said there could be dealt with, not the staying part. Not the staying part. I'm saying everything you said there, that form of discipline, when we sit down as a people, he said, okay, we're going to have an attendance center in East End, one West End, because you want to make it close enough to where the young person, young offender is. If you are in Virgin Gorda, you want to have one in Virgin Gorda. So the point I'm making, many of the disciplines that you talked about, we could have it. At a much deeper level, there's also youth custody to deal with more serious young offenders, but ensuring we're not putting them with these mature criminals. That's also dealt with in the criminal justice alternative sentencing law. But the way the law was drafted, we ensured that the governor could bring into operation various parts of the law. They have not brought in this part about youth custody because they would have to build a youth custody, which is going to cost tremendous amount of money, where you're making sure that you keep these young people separate, you teach them a trade, you have them completely separate, they could even go and come totally different from the normal prison. That hasn't been implemented, but it's also under the law. The reason I said about attendance center is because I want to ensure that that's something fairly simple to implement, and it still would be so useful. And the point I was making about under 21 is that unfortunately they varied it. They changed the definition when it got through to the ages chambers. And they defined child as someone under 16, a young person to be between 16 and under 18, but they did not change the definition of attendance center in section 22, which talks about people under 21. But when you get to the substantive section 6, they're talking about a child or young person. So right away they have severed all those between 18 and under 21. So that needs to be cleaned up. But I've mentioned it, and it's simple to clean up.
Okay, we got to take a break.
Okay, my friend.
So we're going to take a break for word from our sponsors. We're going to come back with more discussion on law reform with attorney and law reform commissioner, Brother Ray Harris. Keep it locked right here to Spotlight.
Spotlight is brought to you by Bolo's High Tech Printery, Virgin Island Motors, and Clarence Thomas Limited.
Welcome back to Spotlight. I'm having a conversation with the Law Reform Commissioner, Attorney Ray Harris, and we're talking about the legislations that has been reformed, some 16 of them, 6 of which have been enacted. We left off talking about the juvenile
Attendance center.
Attendance center.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, it seems to me right now with the situation as it has developed, and what's interesting is that law was completed just when I think more and more juveniles were getting involved in criminal activity. And certainly, I mean, I remember at one point they had 46 young people in the magistrate court in one day.
That's right.
And certainly we would have been able to spare a vast majority of those young people a conviction and a blot on their life.
That's right.
With the enactment and the use and implementation of the
attendance center. Because she already passed and enacted the criminal justice alternative sentencing law, and many provisions have been implemented. But I feel strongly about attendance center because exactly what you're saying. At that time, we were going through that stressful period, and a lot of kids under 21. Because it's not something esoteric. As soon as you get 18, okay, no longer going to get the benefit. We were finding that we needed to deal with these people, and therefore the whole idea was, look, an attendance center is great. Deal with their leisure time under supervision, clean slate as long as you attend, you comply, you learn a skill, you're supervised, there's no criminal record. And that was crucial to me, and I still feel it can be implemented, and therefore even if I'm leaving, I appeal to the authorities to give it some consideration.
Why so much of the legislation remains, for lack of a better word, on the shelf, or the reports that you made of legislation and laws that should be enacted? Why haven't that been done? Why all that work and these pieces of legislation just still laying there? Much needed legislation still laying there.
Two things. Obviously, running a government is not easy. It's only those that have never run a government who think it's easy. You better believe being in the opposition is much easier than being in government. Being a public officer was work to politicians many years. I know how painful and difficult it is. So sometimes just trying to deal with the day-to-day, almost emergencies, keeps a politician fairly busy. But I think one of the key things is this. If you're going to have a law reform commission, as the Virgin Islands were blessed with for a while, and you have the likes of myself and Mr. Jared Ferrara, Paul Webster, you have all those people. I'm being honest. The committees I've had over the last 10 years is almost like a who is who in this Virgin Islands, in every subject area, every discipline. All these people put their minds together. So what really should have happened is that there should have been a policy Because as soon as we're through with a report, we submit 3 reports to the Attorney General up front. Within 2-3 weeks at maximum, another 13 reports are submitted for Cabinet. So there should have been very likely a policy whereby within 6 months maximum of submission of a law reform report in a particular subject area of law, it should be at least submitted to Cabinet, so Cabinet can feast their eyes on the reports and give it consideration. I think that would have made a vast difference. And you see, I think sometimes people don't realize the importance of law reform. That's the same point I was making. You see, we have a democracy. Every 4 years you have an election. The political sovereigns, as I call the masses, have this X to give life or death, literally. And reality, the Virgin Islanders have exercised that right very much in the 10 years that I'm here. But the whole idea is that people have a kind of disconnect from laws. Whereas when you do law reform, you know what it means to go out to East End, to West End, to Road Town, to Virgin Gorge, to George Van Dyke, have people at community meetings. There may not be a vast amount of people, but people are really interested in the subject, who come there, give up themselves, they feel they have had input. You have committees around the table for 8-9 months, giving input of all the little nuances and variations. Therefore, you have tailored a law better than you could ever normally tailor a law in a drafting unit, to say in an AG's chamber, because you have had that kind of participatory approach. And the whole idea too as well is that when the law is passed, people feel a kinship. In Dominica and Creole, they say, Samwe, that's ours, that's mine. You feel something. So you can more identify and very likely more comply with it. Another thing too is, I feel, law reform could be utilized by the political directorate. Any controversial area of law that you know there's some controversy, there's some political fallout, it's a good area to let a law reform commission deal with it and diffuse the political stress. Because you're going out there as a commissioner, you're meeting with the people. Many times too, you could even take people from your society who have diverse views on the same subject matter, and the commission would put them around the table to sit together.
But it
makes a difference.
It's strange though, because you recognize as leaders the need for law reform by virtue of the fact that you're here. Was an indication that it was recognized that there was a need for law reform. Then you are given a priority list,
which you did, which you worked on, finished,
which you worked on and completed. But then you fail to enact. That's a puzzle to me. Is it that we don't realize the importance or the change in leadership? The new leadership didn't have the same philosophy or the same understanding of the relevance and importance of law reform and what these things meant to the advancement of the territory?
Personally, as I told you, I think a lot of the problem is that sometimes the reports were not brought to Cabinet. They were not brought to Cabinet.
So they would languish in the Attorney General's office?
God bless. But the point is that, in fairness to Cabinet, I do not know how many of the reports got to Cabinet. Hopefully they will start moving along, okay? But I think that was part of the problem. And therefore, let's put it this way. If the 16 reports we talked about tonight, Brother Edjuenko, if these laws had all been mediation, arbitration, jury, environmental law, general education, early childhood education, your foundation of your education system, technological and vocational education and training, which I'll talk about a little more in a short while, then you have your existing laws, and you have status of children, which you just submitted. Let's be very honest. If at least 15 of these reports and the laws were implemented, we would not be having this conversation now, would we? Everybody in the society would be well aware of the work of the Commission. You see? Yes. That's a fact of life.
Yes.
You see, and therefore there would be no lack of understanding about the part that the institution is playing. And you see?
Now, the early childhood education, the juvenile sentencing, and
technological and vocational education.
Those pieces of legislation have now proven to be essential to our growth and our progress right now.
Very important.
Right? So what can we do about that? What needs to happen with those so that we can advance?
The truth is, as I said, within the last 2 months, I had a long 2.5+ hour meeting, and the minister actually sat with me with his PS. So I know he's committed to that process. Therefore, I would like to believe that early childhood education, general education regulations, and TechVoc will be on stream. Early childhood education, let's be fair. When I was doing this particular project, I found out that there were 40 to 50 something daycare centers. Because one thing we're doing, we're propagating ourselves. So young ladies are having kids, and these same young ladies may have maternity leave, but when they're through their maternity leave, they have to go back to work. Therefore, they've got to have somewhere to put their children. Now, if you're setting up early childhood education and you're setting up certain standards which are internationally recognized in relation to your infrastructure to ensure safety and everything for your kids, you want to ensure a certain quality of teachers and that type of thing. Of necessity, you can't just pass an early childhood education law and expect everybody to fall in sync, because a lot of people are going to fall by the wayside. They can't come up to scratch. And you're going to create chaos in your society, because where are these young ladies going to put their kids? And many times you have people with daycare centers or early childhood education centers really committed to what they do, but they just don't have the wherewithal. So that is why when we wrote the law dealing with early childhood education, there's a window of good 2-3 years to give people an opportunity to catch up. We also recommended of necessity, because if you're demanding a certain quality of teacher, you of necessity have to give the opportunity to get them trained. So obviously the Ministry of Education, it's recommended in the report, would liaise with the HLAB at Stout College, who used to have such a training program. But that is crucial, because you can't be demanding higher standards from teachers. You're not making that possibility available. Plus, let's face it, under your constitution, you're supposed to give education to all your people. And there are certain people who have special needs. Now, if you check early childhood education in the Virgin Islands, by and large, that is being dealt with by private schools. So right away you have a situation where it could be fairly costly, because it means that if a child has a special need, they would be able to approach the minister and find a school that can deal with that special need. That means you'll also have to utilize a provision very likely in the Education Act, which allows government to have assisted private schools. And automatically become an assisted private school, and there's a whole set of provisions dealing with that in the Act, primary law. Government has certain more control as well. You find that you would have to have some assisted private schools for early childhood education, because some of the bigger, well-established schools would have to be assisted by government to have the wherewithal to deal with certain special needs. Or government may have to decide to get, as a part of their public school education process, early childhood education, because the Education Act also gives the minister a right to designate early childhood education as part of the public school system, which it isn't at the moment. So I can see that any government, in fairness to them, who takes on early childhood education, is not a matter of merely passing a law, which is words on paper, good as it may be, but you have to...
It's a costly implementation process.
That is what the truth is. But they can't duck it. It's just like saying you're going to build a house. Your foundation is the most important thing. In early childhood education, your first 7 years of human being's life, everybody knows, the world knows it. That's the most important, crucial time. And therefore, that is why even in early childhood education, coming into the spirituality aspect that I talk about, we always talk about the literacy, the A, B, C, very important, so you can read and write. You have your numeracy, you can the mathematical aspect, but the spiritual core is not there. And I'm humbly suggesting to the educationists that I've worked with throughout the Caribbean and here as well, that don't shy away from our spiritual core. We people of African descent are spiritual people, and you better believe life is a spiritual journey in the flesh. Therefore, I would love to see the religious leaders of your country, and there are many, get together with your curriculum developers and develop a nice little syllabus for early childhood education, where the basic tenets of life, as you sow, so shall you reap. Be loving, be compassionate, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. As you sow, so you throw a stone, as I always give you that demonstration, because it's so simple for kids. You see the little stone going out, the ripples going out in the pond, hitting and coming back to the centrifugal point. You say, you see, darling, what you think about comes about. If you inculcate those strong tenets within the hearts and minds and the subconscious mind of a child, you have better architects, lawyers, politicians, everything across the board, because you have people of integrity and character. People may say we have religion. We do have religion. Excellent. Thank God for religion. But every religion has certain basic spiritual core values. And I'm saying that, and you know, religion also causes a lot of, not sometimes unity at all. So what I'm saying, by getting these core spiritual values inculcated in the hearts and minds of young children, because look at it this way, at the mind dynamic level, think of it. You have your conscious mind, like right now you have your conscious mind, you're listening to me, and therefore because of your past experiences from the time you're born, your parents, your people, you have your prejudices, your likes and dislikes, and that conscious mind is like a guard at the door deciding what you'll accept and what you'll not accept. But the subconscious mind is like pure fertile soil. If God could give you the best fertile soil on the planet, that any seed you plant in it, it grows. That's the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind doesn't decide what's good or bad, or even deal with a time concept. It just gives back whatever you put in it. And that's why it's important when a child between 0 and 7, you fill that subconscious mind with spiritual nurturing and ensure that you have people of character in the years to come.
So we would need some well-educated teachers in our early childhood education process, because right now we have teachers who, in a lot of instances, young people, perhaps some might have a first degree, some may not. And in the daycare centers themselves, you have persons who may even be high school dropouts that it's sort of like a babysitting warehouse.
The warehouse, indeed.
And I mean the system, the system of nurturing a newborn in the world, because I can't even say it's particular or specific to the Virgin Islands.
No.
It's everywhere. A mother have a child. 3 months later, she's back at work.
That's it.
And the child has not been breastfed. The child has not really truly bonded. The father is usually not a part of the child's life, and then that experience during those early years. So, and we wonder, and we sit here and we discuss in various circles about the poor performance of our young people, the criminal activity of our young people, the antisocial behavior of our young people, and the fact of the matter is, that as a society, we are creating those young people and then turn around and then punishing them for behaving in the way that we have created them to behave.
And that's why I keep on saying, as much as I'm a lawyer, when I sit with people and deal with all different subjects, I keep on harping back on this spirituality vis-a-vis our young people, because I don't want us to lose another.
Where would we get that training from? Forgive me for cutting you off. I mean, how would we get our teachers to be trained in that spiritual area that you're talking about? And because when we hear, and like it or not, when we hear spirituality, we immediately think of religion, and we immediately go to Christianity.
Okay, look at it this way. As regards the teachers, as I said, each Labrador South College used to even have a program for early childhood education. What they have to do is revamp it and start it. As regards the teachers, let's face it, what I'm more talking about is having as an integral part of your syllabus for early childhood, not just in numeracy and literacy, the spirituality aspect.
And I'm asking about the development of that.
Yeah, but the spirituality. I'm putting it to you. That be it Dr. Turnbull, be it different religious leaders right within this country could easily sit and design concepts for little books, and you have a lot of artists and little people who could draw. That's all you need. Little books, just like you have for your ABC or your 1, 2, 3, designed and made, and you could break new ground, as Virgin Islands, the first one bold enough to do it, and just have these little books so that part of your actual syllabus every day, they're inculcating these little ideas. It's not that difficult to teach a child, just like I told you, go out into the yard when you go, throw a stone in the pond, you have a book teaching you about doing unto others, having little stories that teach you why you should be compassionate, why you should talk the truth, why you should be honest. That's not that difficult. It's a matter of getting those seeds in that subconscious mind that I'm talking about, because the subconscious mind is just wide open. The conscious mind hasn't developed very much yet. What kills a child from young, especially when you have dysfunctional families, is statements like, you're foolish just like your father, you're stupid just like your father. You better believe you don't know the impact that can have on a child. Because when a children, as I told you, their subconscious mind is wide open, their conscious mind is not really highly developed. So what the grandmother, the friends, the others say to that child gets into the subconscious.
At that point they had no defense.
And they have no defense. And that's the point I'm making. So what I'm saying to people is, please, this may sound like such a simple idea. It may have come from some so-called first world nation coming and telling you to do it, and telling you, don't use the word spirituality. That's a mistake, because we are spirit beings going through a physical experience, not physical beings having some spurious idea of spirit. That has happened from long enough. You see, it's like a coconut, excellent fruit. We've been using the husk and the shell for too long. We need to be nurtured by the fruit and drink inside. That's the spiritual nurturing we need. We got to think for ourselves.
We got to take a break.
We got to think for ourselves.
We got to think for ourselves.
Yeah, we got to think for ourselves.
We're going to continue the discussion when we come back on spiritual development. Because it seems like that is at the core of our challenge. And I was talking to some young people today about why young people get involved in gangs. And we were talking about parenting as one of the causes of young people getting in gangs, or I should say the lack of proper parenting. And the young people recognize that the parents did not have the ability, a lot of parents did not have the ability to raise the children in such a way that they felt secure and loved and had high self-esteem and confidence. All of those things being lacking make young people want to go and join with other young people to find that bonding with and that support and that security and that self-confidence and that self-esteem. We're going to talk about dealing with that from a spiritual component, and the spiritual and the challenges we have with our spiritual being at the core of our antisocial behavior, and how we need to rectify that, and what are some of the practical things that can be done, and I think particularly in education, in order to alleviate those challenges. Keep it locked. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors.
This program is sponsored by the law firm of J.S. Archibald & Co. and by the trust company J.S. Archibald Trust Services Limited, both of Roadtown, Tortola, BVI.